That's Muhammad's house right there. There's Khadija's house. They're cementing it all over. But here's the curious thing. Whenever you go back to an archaeological site, it doesn't matter where it is in the world, whether it's in Jerusalem or Damascus or Mecca, you always have archaeologists go with you so that if there's any ruins there, if there are any artifacts there, they take them, they preserve them, and put them into museums so that we can look at them, right? That is by law, done all over the world. In this case, that has been done as well. But guess what? They haven't found a thing to preserve. They've not found one thing to preserve, yet they're digging down hundreds of feet. They can't find anything there. Can you now see why they're cementing it up? No wonder they're cementing it up. I would too if I were in their place. It looks like Mecca has no history. And yet it should have the oldest history of all cities in mankind. Nothing has been found. If you don't have Mecca, the third problem is, what are you going to do with the Qibla? The Qibla is the direction of prayer. Every Muslim has to pray towards the Kaaba. And they have all kinds of machinations to help you to know where to pray. That's my hotel room. There's a little arrow that was on my hotel room in Kuala Lumpur, so I knew exactly where Mecca was. In every mosque, they have a mihrab where you can know exactly where the direction of Mecca is. And as you come down here, you can even get it on your apps, on your smartphones. According to Surah 2, Ayah 143 to 150, the direction of the Qibla was then redirected back to Mecca in 624. So we're talking about 624, which means every mosque should be facing Mecca after 624, which means every mosque. There are no mosques prior to 624, right? In fact, in the last century, another 1905, two researchers, Dr. Creswell and Dr. Fehérváry, when they were digging around old mosques in what is today Iraq and also in Egypt, they came across the Wasit Mosque and the Kufa Mosque in Iraq and the Fustat Mosque in Egypt. And as they dug down to the original floor plans, they noticed that the Qibla for all three of these mosques were wrong. The two mosques in Iraq, the Wasit and the Kufa Mosque, were facing straight west. The one in Fustat was facing straight east. They should have been facing down here. This is the 1905 they noticed this. And they just said, this is a curiosity. They suggested that maybe these mosques were facing Jerusalem. They were off by 3 to 5 degrees. But that's understandable. They weren't really interested in that. They just wanted to look and see what they could find. We do know that if we have documentary evidence from Jacob of Edessa in 705, he even admits in the 8th century that it is from all of this clear that it is not to the south of the Jews in the Maghreb here in the regions of Syria pray, but towards Jerusalem or the Kaaba. That's what he thought. He was wrong. Dan Gibson has the one that has begun and run with this question, and he has come up with this new documentary, which you can get. Go and get it. Only costs $15. Called The Sacred City. You can get it online. Just pull it down onto your computer. And what I'm going to do now is introduce what he has now found, because he wanted to take this question a step further. He wanted to find out where these mosques were praying. So he looked at numerous mosques from around the world, starting with the Mosque of the Two Qiblas. You can see there's a picture of it in Medina. There's one Qibla going that direction, and this direction, and one Qibla going, if you look off to here, that's the older one going off that direction. The Mosque of the Two Qiblas supposedly was facing Mecca, but it was returned, it moved to Mecca later. What was the earlier Qibla? When they uncovered it, they were refurbishing the mosque in 1987, and as they dug down, they came across the original Qibla. And look what they found. The original Qibla was not facing Mecca, it was facing the opposite direction towards Petra in Jordan. The great mosque in Guangzhou in China, built in 630, which is Guangzhou, I've been told. Sorry, I got it wrong. Did I still say it correct? Anybody correct me? I got hammered by a Chinese the other day for saying it wrong. Guangzhou? Zhao? It's now Canton today. In 630, take a look. It's 12 degrees off. So where is it facing? Not Jerusalem, not Mecca, but Petra. Look at the date, 630. The Fustat Mosque outside of Egypt, the one we've been referring to, built in 641. The description of the original floor plan showed a Qibla to the east and then later turned towards the south. Dan Gibson found that Qibla towards the east was Petra. Therefore, in 700 AD, it was still facing Petra. The great mosque of Baalbek in Lebanon, the Qibla in 701. Look at the date, 701. Muhammad died in 632. The Qibla was canonized in 624. Are you following me what I'm saying here? We're talking about 85 years later. It was facing Petra, not Mecca. Baalbek in Lebanon, the Qibla runs right through Petra. When we go to Jordan, the Amman Citadel in Jordan. Now this is interesting. Take a look at this one, because if you look carefully, you'll see two mosques. You'll see a bottom one here, that's built in 701. Then you'll see another mosque built up here later, built in 740. You notice there are two different Qiblas? That one there, the 701 mosque, is facing Petra. The one behind it and up above it, built in 740, is facing Mecca. Something happens between 701 and 740. Let's go and find out. The great mosque of Sana'a in the capital city of Yemen in 705, the Qibla, again, is facing Petra. We go to 706, the Kirbat al-Minya in Israel, built by Al-Walid, who is a son of Abdul Malik, on the shores of Galilee. Its Qibla is not towards Mecca, nor towards Jerusalem, but towards Petra. The Wasat Mosque that we talked about earlier from Iraq, built in 706. Archaeologists Krezel and Faravardi thought it pointed towards Jerusalem, but it doesn't. We now know that that mosque, the Qibla, is facing Petra. They were off by 3 degrees. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, now take a look at this one. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque that's right there in front of the Dome of the Rock. It's built in 706, built on a citadel. But when you look at the entire citadel, both of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is here, and the Dome of the Rock, which is up there, when you look at the two of them, you will see that the entire citadel is facing one uniform direction. So both the Dome of the Rock, which is built in 691, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is built in 706, both of them are, in fact, all of the citadel is facing Petra. And it's still facing Petra today. It hasn't changed. The Damascus Mosque in 709, the Qibla is facing Petra. Now we're up in Syria. Staying in Syria, the Mosque of Umar in 720, we're almost 100 years later, and the Qibla is facing Petra. The Kirbat al-Masjar Mosque in the West Bank, we're now in Palestine. 724, we're now almost 100 years later, and the Qibla is not towards Mecca nor Jerusalem, it's facing Petra. The Anjar Mosque in Lebanon, 724. This is a good one because this one was abandoned, so therefore it's preserved well. It's still pretty much the way when it was abandoned. And when you look at the Qibla there, you will find that the Qibla is facing directly towards Petra there in Lebanon. Notice how up to 725, all of the Qiblas are facing Petra and uniformly facing Petra. Muslims have tried to come back to me and say, well, they just didn't know their direction. They were not sure of the fact because it was all desert area. I said, these are people that did not have roads. They had camels. And when you're on camels in the middle of the desert, you better follow the stars. You better know your direction, otherwise you die. These people certainly knew their direction. What's more, why is it that uniformly every one of them is facing Petra? Uniformly, they're facing Petra. There you can see a backed up view as what we're talking about. Now, interestingly, when we get to 728, the Qiblas neither face Petra nor Mecca. That's a curiosity. And then finally, we get the first mosque that we have been able to find that's facing Mecca, and it's not till 731. And it's as far away as in Banbor in Pakistan. Pakistan, Zindahad. When you go back and you look there, you will see that it is Pakistan that finally gets it right. But the Mushta Mosque is an Umayyad mosque. That's interesting, because it was built in 743. Another 20 years later, and it's back to facing in Petra again. When you get to North Africa, there seems to be a real confusion. Here's the Ribat Fortress in Susa in Tunisia, built in 771. It's not facing either Petra or Mecca. It's facing straight south. The Cordoba Mosque in Spain, it's not facing Petra or Mecca. It's facing straight south. Again, much like the one in Kirawan that you have in Tunisia. Look at the date, 817. The Qiblas were canonized in 624. We're almost 200 years later, and it's still not facing Mecca. So, his conclusion, all the Qiblas were facing towards Petra until 725. There was a confusion for the next 100 years, and then the Qibla was not finalized towards Mecca until 822. That's 200 years too late. It takes them 200 years to finally canonize the Qibla towards Mecca. So, what's the significance of Petra? Well, take a look at that trade route map. that I showed you earlier. What's at the center of all the trade? Petra is at the center of all the trade. What also is significance of Petra? It was the sanctuary of the Umayyads. The Umayyads used Petra as their sanctuary. Remember, they came into power in 661, and they were in power until 749. So, roughly 80 to 90 years they were in power. Those of you who have been to Petra, you will notice it is the center, is a city of tombs and temples. It is the center of the Nabatean kingdom. The Nabateans are the one that give us Arabic. Arabic comes from the Nabatean script. The Nabateans were there in Petra was as their sanctuary, and that was their sanctuary from the 2nd century BC. They were one of the great powers in the early years. And when you look at Petra, you will notice that it's in a valley, exactly like the Quran says. It has a parallel valley, just like the traditions say. It has a stream going through it. It has fields, trees, grass. It has clay. It has loam. It has olive trees. It's near that pillar of salt. If there was a pillar of salt, it would be near Petra. Petra has all the items listed in the Quran and also the Islamic traditions. Thus, could Petra be the place they are referring to? When you take a look at where Ad, Thamud, and Midian are, they're all around Petra, not Mecca. They're 600 miles further north. Significance of what we're saying? Nothing is known of Muhammad until the late 7th century from within Arab sources. His biography, the Sirah, the sayings, the Hadith, don't appear to the 9th century. His city isn't referred to until the mid-8th century. Thus, much of what we know of Muhammad is written down hundreds of years later and hundreds of miles away. It looks like nothing more than a redaction by Abdul Malik. So, what are the conclusions by the historians? Islam and the Prophet's life as we know it was not derived from the 7th century, but evolved over a period of 200 to 300 years and then redacted back on the Prophet's life and compiled in the 9th century. Now, that's what they're saying. New books and documentaries are being published and question the classical account of Islam's beginning. And the questions are these: why are there no Muslim sources for 200 years? That's the billion-dollar question. Why do the claims they make not fit the historical record? Why are the geographical references so few and confusing? Why do they all seem to be much further north, 600 miles further north? Why are there so many references to vegetation which would not have existed in Mecca? Why is Mecca not even mentioned until 741, nor included on any map until 900? Why is Mecca not on the trade route? Why are all the Qiblas facing Petra for the first 100 years? Then there's a confusion for the next 100 years, and they're not standardized to Mecca until 822, 200 years too late. Therefore, much of what we know about early Islam is now in doubt. So, what really happened? Now, this is the scenario that we're looking at right now. This may change in 10 years. It may change even in 1 year. Because so much new material is being found that we're always having to upgrade it. This is what we think so far. To make sense of all what's going on, we need to begin with Abdul ibn Zubair. Abdullah ibn Zubair was the one that rebelled against the Umayyads. He didn't see them as legitimate rulers. He was the governor of Petra himself. When he rebelled in 683, during the beginning of the Marwanid period of what we know as the Umayyad Caliphate. You have the Sufyanis from 661 up until 680, then Marwan I takes over power, and then 683, Zubair rebels against him. He's there in Petra, and this is the beginning of what we know as the Second Civil War. Now, what's curious and what's interesting is the Umayyads are not down in Medina, they're not down in Mecca, they're not in Jerusalem, they're not in Petra, they're way up in Damascus. What are they doing way up in Damascus? Why has no one questioned this? That's even another 450, 500 miles even further north. So if this is the center of Islam, why is it so far away? In fact, you're talking about almost 1,000 miles away from Mecca. It's obvious that people haven't asked these questions because these are damaging questions. And that's why we're asking them now. And you can then understand why Zubair, when he then rebels against the Umayyads, he's got to leave Petra. So what does he do? He destroys the Kaaba, and then he takes the black stone, which is in Petra. There is documentation that it's been there for many years. Wherever the black stone is where God's presence is. He takes the black stone, leaves Petra in 683, and flees down to the south. Where did he flee to? Looks like he fled to Mecca. The Abbasids, meanwhile, who are headquartered up in Kufa and in Baghdad, further to the east, they do not like the Umayyads. They have always had a problem with the Umayyads. They then come alongside Zubair. Zubair is then killed by the Umayyads, and so therefore, you have two different groups who now have two different Qiblas. One towards Mecca and the other towards Petra. Now, let's now go back to Abd al-Malik, because this is where it all comes and it gets fleshed out. Abd al-Malik is the Umayyad Caliph. He's already having problems with Zubair. He's killed Zubair, in fact. He's got to establish his ascendancy. So what does he do? In 691, he plants a huge building right in the middle of Jerusalem called the Dome of the Rock. You've seen it, those who've been to Jerusalem. It stands out. It's a beautiful building. You can see it from all over Jerusalem, with that beautiful golden dome. That's built in 691. He needs to create an identity. He needs to create his own Arab identity. Now remember, when the Arabs who then took over the Sassanid world and also the Byzantine world, which they had done by 642. They had run over Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Cairo. They took over these 5 great cities of Levant. They were all nomadic. They were not urban people. That's why they did not live in those cities. They lived outside the cities in garrison towns. But someone had to run the cities. Well, who are they going to let run the cities? They're going to let their cousins from the Abrahamic race, the Jews and the Christians, who were well educated. They were already living in the cities. So they let them run the cities. They became what they call mawalas or mawalis. As long as they ran the cities, the Arabs then benefited from all the produce. They didn't have to run it themselves, and they could continue to conquer. And that's why they then moved right across North Africa, all the way to Spain, and moved the other direction to India. They were busy conquering, and they kept the Jews, primarily the Jews and the Christians, to run what they conquered. But the problem is this. The Jews and the Christian had a prophetic line. The Arabs don't have a prophetic line. The Jews and the Christians were the ones from which all the prophets came to. Therefore, they had a strong identity. Where was there an Arab prophet? So by the time, 40 years later, by the time Abd al-Malik comes to power, he is known as the great Arab reformer. We've known this about him. Everybody knows him as the great Arab reformer. He is the one that introduces Arabic as the international script. Now, up until that time, all the caliphs had used coins. They had coins that were like the dinar that you see here. Take a look at the dinar. That's the Byzantine dinar at the top. And when you notice, you'll see the emperor with 2 retainers on either side. On the back side of the dinar is the Byzantine cross. The Sufyanis, or the Umayyads, take the same coin because they still want to use the same type of coinage. And instead of using the emperor, they put themselves, the caliph, with 2 retainers. On the back side is the Byzantine cross with the crosspiece taken off. These are all from the British Museum. So they retain images of themselves. Since when is Islam allowed to have any images? That's anathema, is it not? When Abd al-Malik comes to power, he has a coin like this. That's a coin of himself with a large sword, and there's the Byzantine cross, or half the Byzantine cross. He then throws that out, and in 691 introduces these coins. He takes off the images and introduces script. And what do you think's on that script? The Shahada. This is the first time we see the Shahada. This is the first time anywhere that the Shahada is introduced, in 691. Are you getting me? Are you following me? That's not all he does. He then builds the greatest structure of its day, the Dome of the Rock, built there in Jerusalem. But take a look at where it's built. It's not just built anywhere. Who controlled Jerusalem, and who's the great power that he's up against? The Byzantines. He's up against the Byzantines. He doesn't care about the Sassanids because they are pretty much destroyed and they don't have a common ancestry. But he does have a common ancestry with the Byzantines because they have the prophetic line. So what are you going to do? You're going to build the greatest structure in the history of mankind, slap it right there in Jerusalem, but you're going to put it up on a hill above the Church of the Sepulchre, which is the centerpiece for the Byzantines. There you can see the Church of the Sepulchre across the valley and the Dome of the Rock. It's built above it to get one-upmanship. Are you getting that? And then he faces the Dome of the Rock towards Petra. Where's the sanctuary? So now you've got the biggest building, the best building, but to understand what's going on, you want something that's larger and more prominent than the Byzantines, the holiest city for the Jews and the Christians. Therefore, why not build this in Damascus? Because he's building it where the Byzantines have their holy place. And he says, we have the next holy place. And this is where, of course, if we now ask any Muslim today, what happens there? They say, this is where Muhammad went in the middle of the night on the back of the wing holes called the Miraj that I introduced earlier, and that's where he went up to the 7 heavens. If that's the reason why the Dome of the Rock was built, then why is there nothing written about it? Look at all the ambulatories. Go look at all the inscriptions on the inner ambulatories. That's the only original part of the buildings that exist today. The building has been destroyed and rebuilt 11 times. If you look at the original ambulatories, you will notice that there are inscriptions up there. Take a look at those inscriptions. There's nothing at all written about the Miraj. So what's written on them? Well, notice what's written on them. O people of the Scripture, do not exaggerate in your religion, nor utter not concerning Allah save the truth. The Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, was only a messenger of Allah, and his word which he conveyed unto Mary, and a spirit from him. So believe in Allah and his messengers, and say not three. Cease. It is better for you. Allah is only one God. Far as it be removed from the transcendent majesty that he should have a son. Surah 4, Ayah 171. This is the first Quranic material we can find. The first Quranic material is introduced on the Dome of the Rock. That's Surah 4, Ayah 171. Who is it against? Jesus, the Trinity, his sonship. It's against us. Praise be to God, who hath not taken unto himself a son, that's against Jesus, and who hath no partner, that's against Jesus being the partner of God, Surah 17, Ayah 111, and then Surah 112, there is no God but God. There's the Shahada, there's the beginning of the Shahada. There is no God but God. He is one, he has no associates, that's against Jesus Christ. Say, he is God the one, God the eternal begotten, besought of all. He begetteth not, nor was begotten, that's against Jesus Christ again, and there is none comparable unto him. Muhammad is the messenger of God. That's the first time Muhammad's name is introduced. That's the first place we find Muhammad's name. And it's introduced on the Dome of the Rock. And it's introduced on the coins the same year. Are you following what's going on? So they attack Jesus, and they introduce Muhammad. He then replaces Jesus on the Dome of the Rock. Now, at the same time, we have the protocols, the caliphal protocols. This is done by Yehuda Nevo. Yehuda Nevo noticed that all the protocols from the Sufyani period of the Umayyad Caliphate, from 661 all the way up until 680, up until 685, there is no Bismillah, there is no reference in any of these protocols. These are the official documents of the caliphs themselves. When you look at these official documents, there's no reference to Muhammad, there's no reference to Mecca, there's no reference to the Quran, and there's no reference to people called Muslims, and there's no reference to a religion called Islam. Those are the 5 things that these caliphal protocols should be replete with. They don't exist on any of the protocols until 691. In 691, Dr. Neville says, overnight, they are introduced into the protocols. It's done overnight, and Muhammad's name is introduced at that time. The Shahada is introduced at that time. So here you have it being introduced on a building, on coins, and on the caliphal protocols, all in 691. He replaces all the images and replaces it with Arabic script. So once he introduces Muhammad, he then needs a revelation, because every prophet has to have a revelation. That's why now, and we're going to do work on this more tomorrow, so I'm not going to unpack it much today. When you look at the earliest manuscripts, they only begin to get introduced at this period. The earliest material that we have on the palimpsest that I'll introduce tomorrow are from the time of Abdul Malik. But then they get changed by the time his son comes around in 705. The earliest Quranic manuscripts begin to appear during the reign of his son Al-Walid from 690s to 750s. None of these manuscripts that we're going to see tomorrow are complete, nor do they even parallel each other, nor do they parallel the Quran that we have today. They continue to be changed and corrected for 200 years. Therefore, the sanctuary in Petra is destroyed by an earthquake in 713. Once the earthquake comes and destroys Petra, that means God's presence is no longer there. So the Umayyads have no other choice but then to move the sanctuary down to Mecca. That's why then from that time on, they decide, and this is where the rivalry goes on. When are they going to actually move it up to Mecca, went down to Mecca, and that's where the rivalry begins. And that's why the Abbasids start coming to the fore. And it's the Abbasids then that start changing the Qiblas starting in 731. So, here you go. Now that the Muslims have a prophet, who now has a revelation, who now has a sanctuary, Mecca, they need a history. So what do? Can you now understand why the Siddha takes so long to get written? Why it only is introduced, not in 765 by 765 by Ishaq. Interestingly, we don't have Ibn Ishaq's material. It's all been destroyed. Which stands to reason. Looks like they destroyed everything that did not agree with the canonized text. And that's why finally Ibn Hisham writes it down. But Ibn Hisham makes it very clear that he threw out anything that he disagreed with at Ibn Ishaq. And he finally finalizes it in 833. So it takes him to 833 to finally write down the story of this prophet that was introduced in 691. It takes them another 40 years to then introduce his sayings. Can you then understand why he was given 600,000 and he whittles them down only to 7,397? He throws out 98%. Can you understand why he had to do that? Because that's where the censoring comes in. And that's why it makes sense now that this does not happen over a 22-year period like Muslims would like to tell us. What's happened to my PowerPoint here? So they now have a history. The Sirah is introduced in 833. The Hadith is introduced in 870. And the Tafsir, then the commentaries on how to understand the Quran, is introduced in 923, the 10th century. By the 9th century, they now have a book, the man, the place, and the story. And a new religion is formed and growing, yet not within a mere 22 years, but evolving over 200 to 300 years. How am I doing on time? I'm just concluding here. New books are being published which question the classical account of Islam's beginning. Questions we're asking is, why are the no Muslim sources for 200 years? Why do the claims they make not fit the historical record? Why are the geographical references so few and confusing? Why do they all seem to be much further north? Why are there so many references to vegetation which wouldn't exist in Mecca? Why is Mecca not mentioned until 741 and not included any map until 900? Why is Mecca not even on the international trade route? Why do all the Qiblas face Petra for the first 100 years, then are confused for the next 100, and aren't standardized to Mecca until 822? 822, that's 200 years too late. Why is Abdul Malik's role what is Abdul Malik's role in all of this? Does a nascent Islam really begin with him? Since much of what we know about early Islam is in doubt, since much of the Quran is also in doubt, since nothing is known of Muhammad until the 7th century, or Mecca until the 8th century, or his story until the 9th century, hundreds of years and hundreds of miles away, can we conclude that Islam is nothing more than a later redaction, possibly, I would say, begun by Abdul Malik, but I want to change that. I would also say that there is a political competition going on between the Umayyads and the Abbasids. And that's why Petra was finally discarded and Mecca was then included. But by that time, the Quran had already been written. That's why they couldn't excise all these geographical locations. That's why they couldn't take out all these references to Ad, Thamud, and Midian. They weren't able to do that. Can you see why? They should have done that in the 7th century before they even started writing the Quran. Too late. We've caught them hanging. And that's why it's so difficult to support Mecca. Can you now understand? They have the wrong man at the wrong place doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. Now what about Jesus? We know where Jesus was born in Bethlehem. We know where Jesus grew up in Nazareth. We know where Jesus died and went in Jerusalem. We know what Jesus did for the last 3 years. We know that from the eyewitness accounts, according to Matthew and John. We know from hostile accounts, Thallus, Tacitus, Josephus. We know when they were written down between 50 to 60 years. Few people doubt his historicity. Thus, we have the right man at the right place doing the right thing at the right time. Ooh, I love Jesus. And can you see why I love the Bible? Can you imagine if we had the problems that Islam has? How would we even debate what he did and what he said? With this kind of material now coming to the fore, and this has just been out just 1 month. Can you see, from here on out, we're just going to be asking these same questions. And that's why I love history, because the more they scratch, the more they find. The more they find, the more we shine. The more we shine, the more they whine, oh, how sublime. Thank God we don't have this problem. See, everything that I've said today, all this material that we're now using against Mecca and against the Qibla and looking at all the problems between the Umayyads and the Abbasids, have you noticed? This has all been foisted against Christianity. We've had it since the 1800s, and we had the documentary hypothesis. We had enormous amount of criticisms, of redacted criticism, source criticism. We've had all kinds of criticism against the Trinity and the person of Jesus Christ. We've had it for about 150 years, and we've answered every one of them. One of the best men I know, Sam Shamoun, can answer everything about Jesus Christ. But then we have not taken these questions to Islam. We are just now starting to focus these kind of questions, redacted criticism. What have I done today? I've just been doing source criticism, redacted criticism. I've been doing historical criticism, a little bit of literary criticism. It's not very difficult to do what we're doing here. Every one of you can do this. We're now doing it in London. This is all going up on YouTube. It's starting to really hurt the Muslims. They don't have an answer for it. See, when this was brought out in Tübingen there with Wellhausen back in the 1800s, it decimated the church by 1905. By 1905 in Europe, all the churches were destroyed, most of the churches, not all, because of Darwinianism and because of historical criticism. Now, we've learned to find all these material. That's why we have a great museum tour called the British Museum Tour in the British Library. If you come to London, we're going to take you on it. In 3 hours, we will show you artifact after artifact stolen by the British, put into that building so we could look at it, that shows you exactly how 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Samuel can be historically proven. We have names, dates, places, and people all right there in front of you to show and support the book of Genesis, the book of Jeremiah, the book of Isaiah. It's so good to be able to say that, because we've done our homework. Where are the Muslims going to go to find these kind of objects? Where are the artifacts to support Mecca, when they can't even find any ruins below those skyscrapers? Those skyscrapers are digging up nothing but sand. And that's exactly what Islam is built on. Nothing but sand. Thank God we're built on a rock. And that's why the rocks, if we don't cry, the rocks are going to cry out for us. And that's why we just need to fall back in the safety of our Lord Jesus Christ and know that He is putting the rocks in place and putting the tablets and the murals and the stelas so we can support what we know. And that's why I love my Bible. And that's why I love Jesus Christ. Good. Any questions you may have?